Welcome back to another 2024 presidential election prediction. Today, we're going to be looking at all the latest polling in every single state that matters. To save y'all time, we're going to like the video to get it started. And without a further ado, we're going to start off with 172 electoral votes for Donald Trump with 183 for Joe Biden. Now, keep in mind that we already have about 2/3 of the states filled in. The rest of them are going to be close enough to talk about. So let's get right into the subject at hand. So first and foremost, we have a national environment that's always shifting, whether that be a felony conviction on Donald Trump or what people say is a witch hunt against him. Nevertheless, we see things that sway the polls in different directions. We are about less than a week out from a national debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And right now, in the most latest polls, we have big surveys pointing towards Trump winning the popular vote by 3 or even 2% if you include RFK. So that's very notable. Now, these polls are a little bit debatable because, for example, this one has Kennedy getting 14% when he's polling at single digits at this point. But also we have polls as of 4 days ago that have them about even. So you can see how close this election really is. Now, moving on to RCP, they also have a somewhat similar story. Again, Trump is winning the popular vote by less than 1 in a 1v1. But we do have outliers that we're going to address too, like this Rasmussen poll. The Rasmussen poll has him up by 9. That's ridiculous. But we also could say that the Fox News polls that have Biden winning by 2 points is also pretty unlikely. But so we're going to start out with the state of Ohio. So this state is obviously the one that everybody 20 years ago would have said is the most important one, the key purple ground that would sway the election either way. Truth is that it's not the case anymore. There has been a realignment that has made it pretty much guaranteed Republican, especially for a guy like Donald Trump that really gets that vote out in the rural areas, etc. So as you can see in the most recent polling, we have Marist College predicting Trump winning by 7 points. That's in an election with Kennedy involved too, which makes it a little more accurate. Plus, Kennedy's only polling at 5, which seems to be in line with reality insofar as he will do better than average for third parties, but not enough to be a notable third place candidate. And so for that reason alone, I can put in with a high degree of confidence that Ohio will go for Donald Trump. Moving on to the state of Florida, we all know that, again, just like Ohio, if you wanted to pick out 20 years ago what would be the biggest swing state in any given election, you were either getting Ohio or Florida in your calculus. Again, this was the entire centerpiece of the 2000 election historically, is who won the state of Florida. So let's see how that state's holding up right now. Donald Trump won the state by about 3-4 years ago. So let's see what happened now. In the most recent poll, we have Trump up by 6. Now, this poll is really bad for a couple of different reasons. For one, 432 likely voters being sampled is not a good number. You would be looking at more than 1,000. And for smaller states, you could understand why Vermont wouldn't have bigger polls, but in a place like Florida, there ought to be more. But what it does point to is that the funding isn't being spent by either party in Florida because they know it's a foregone conclusion that Trump's likely to win. If that's the case, of course, then we have to we have to rely on these polls right here. As of about 2 weeks ago, we have on June 9th, we have Trump winning by 5, 6, 6, 4, and 10. So these are somewhat variable, but you can see that Trump's probably winning by 5-ish, anywhere from 5 to 10 percentage points, which is still better than 2020, which kind of makes sense. So you have 219 electoral votes for Donald Trump and 183 for Joe Biden. All right, so right now we're in North Carolina. As y'all can see, we have some very lackluster polling as well. Another reason is because, again, Trump is extremely likely to win North Carolina. I'd say he's north of 90% odds of winning it. Anyway, so you can see that Trump's winning the most recent polls as of about 11 days ago by 3, 8, 4%. And if you go even further down up to about 3 weeks ago, you can see that a bigger poll by the East Carolina University Center has Trump winning by 5, which is in line with reality. Again, Trump won North Carolina by between 1 and 2% last time, and he's doing like 4 or 5% better in the popular vote this time around, seemingly. So according to the polls, as of right now, Trump's winning the state by 5. And so that's a solid win for Donald Trump. Right now, we're going to be looking into the state of New Mexico as we've got some of the base floor, basically the firewall for Donald Trump and the Republican Party this 2024 election. We're going to address the blue wall and see who is most likely to be kind of those 90 to 95% chance of being Democrat still. And those states consist of, I think, New Mexico and Colorado primarily, and then somewhat followed by Virginia and Minnesota. But we're going to start off with New Mexico. If you can see here, you'll notice that we do have some small polls. Again, only 555 voters asked here, but Public Polling Policy, PPP, has Biden winning by 7%. This is a number based off of a poll about a week ago. This is a decent result for Donald Trump because, again, Trump lost the state of New Mexico by double digits last time. So for him to do like 4% better is in line with, again, the popular vote being different too. So this is in line with reality. I think this is a good solid poll to refer to. Again, the most recent poll before that would have been never, basically. The most recent poll we had was from August. And so to have a poll as recently as this month is somewhat impressive. And for them to spend money now versus not spending money last year in this election polling shows that the state is getting too close for Democrats to just take for granted. And if that's true, then that shows that the balance of the race is becoming a defensive outing for Joe Biden, where he's having to have his money, or I guess the party money, go towards sampling New Mexico just to see if everything's kosher with the Democrat dominance in the state. And so that's a good sign for the Republicans. Again, it's only worth 5 electoral votes, so it will not matter at all. But anyway, as you guys can see, Colorado has not been really given the funding that the other swing states have been given for obvious reasons. It's pretty likely Joe Biden does retain the state. It's only mentioned for me personally because I want to be diligent with the viewers. So keep a like the video if you want me to be this thorough. But basically, yeah, Biden will probably win the state, given that Trump's not spending any money polling it at all. But I mean, looking at the most recent sampling from Emerson as of about 5 months ago, we have Trump losing the state by 6. Which is still an improvement over him losing Colorado in 2020, I think by about 11%. And so this is still better than nothing, but it's still definitely not looking like it's going to swap sides this election cycle, which basically makes sense. If you want a margin for this, look at 2016's margin, and you'll see that Trump losing by maybe 5 is in line with reality. So moving on, we're going to go to the state of Virginia. Now, the state of Virginia has a complete influx of information. Again, Virginia went for Biden by about 10 percentage points in 2020, and it went to Hillary by about like 4 or 5. So the state's been Democrat for a good while, and it hasn't really been contested since like 2012 anyway. That being said, things are changing. In fact, there's been an influx in spending in the state of Virginia, more so than Colorado or New Mexico combined. In fact, when we look at the most recent polling by Fox News as of a couple weeks ago, you see that Biden's winning by 1 in a race with Kennedy in it. Whereas if Kennedy's taken out for whatever reason, Trump and Biden are even. And you can see the Trump campaign. If you look at the social media, they are really flaunting this, especially a couple of weeks ago when it was newer. You have another poll from last month, which is of lesser quality in my opinion because it has a smaller sample base. Either way, it has Trump tied with Biden 1v1, and with other people in the race, it's a Biden +2, which is interesting because usually the third party helps Republicans in this election cycle with Kennedy in it. That being said, the polls have been trending slightly Republican over time. But again, there's not too much to go off of considering that they weren't really spending money on this back then. But yeah, so Trump is looking to be competitive in Virginia. He's campaigning there a little bit too. But he's not yet winning. In fact, the Trump campaign is saying like, whoa, we're tied. And that's remarkable. And to be honest, it is. But just because you get a gold star for making it close doesn't mean you're going to win it. So just going off of the polls right now, it's still a blue state. Dangerously close, though, because obviously if this is tied, then what the hell is going on in Michigan or Wisconsin? And speaking of Rust Belt states, let's go to Minnesota. So again, you guys can notice the most recent poll by Emerson, which is a pretty solid pollster, 10 days ago shows that Joe Biden is losing to Donald Trump in the state with Kennedy in it by about 1 percentage point. And that's actually really notable because, again, Trump lost Minnesota worse than he did in 2016. So in the high single digits, I believe, it went for Biden, even after the George Floyd fiasco and the riots and whatever have you. The summer of love, they say. And maybe we're in a different type of summer of love where Trump is looking poised to even win the state, arguably. As you can see, the trend has been pretty favorable to Trump. As of the past couple of weeks, you see an influx of polling. Again, when I started doing this several weeks ago, that was not the case. It was a barren wasteland when it came to polling. But I mean, this shows a good trend. Again, if we look at polls from months ago, you'll see that Biden was winning the state in all of the polls. But you can notice over time that Trump's lead, or not even lead, but it's getting more competitive and more purple twinge with magenta red. And so that's a notable sign there. I think it's still a Biden state right now, but it's looking to be kind of close for a myriad of different reasons. And so I think also keep in mind Somalis and also refugees and Muslims that might be able to vote in this election will probably not turn out for Joe. And so that might be borne out in the polling too. New Hampshire hasn't really gotten the love that it usually gets in elections. In fact, New Hampshire low-key has been a battleground state for decades now, as early as 2000 from what I recall. Regardless of that fact, of course, we do have a University of New Hampshire Survey Center poll that's really well-sized given the smallness of the state. You'll notice that Biden's winning by 4, and then the other poll with Kennedy in it, Biden's winning by 3. Now, Biden winning by 3 in the most recent polling last month is still not telling you the truth insofar as obviously as time goes on, Biden's numbers get slightly worse all the time. He's not dropping like a rock because he's already fallen so far. But, obviously when you're at 40%, you lose another tenth of a percent, whatever. It's all very killer in the grand scheme of things politically. And so for Joe Biden to be up by 3 in New Hampshire is bad news because, again, that was a month ago. So God knows what that number is now. And I'm assuming it's worse. And beyond that, Kennedy only getting 3% for once in polling history, I think is a low ball of Kennedy support. So I think that would further help Donald Trump, if anything. And so again, New Hampshire went to Biden by about 7 point something percent in 2020. And so for Biden to lose 4% of his lead is a really good sign for Donald Trump in the other states, of course. In this niche situation, obviously Biden does end up winning. And you can see that they're almost tied even. But we're going to move on to Nebraska 2nd District. Nebraska 2nd District, actually, we're going to cover it when it gets to a tie, maybe. So Georgia's been looking pretty good for the Republican Party recently. Brian Kemp won re-election by a lot over his opponent. And if you look at 2024, it's looking really good for Donald Trump. If you look at it, Emerson College, again, has Trump up by 8 in a big 5-way election. But even more so, when it comes to 1-to-1, Trump is still winning by 5. Huge numbers because, again, this is kind of better than 2016 even. Again, 8 years ago. And a lot has changed since then. But again, referring to the polls even sponsored by the Democratic Party, you'll notice that even this partisan poll has Trump winning by 1. So that's a really, really bad look for Joe Biden. And in fact, if you look at the polls, Joe Biden has not led a single poll in about 2 to 3 months. And so that kind of just tells you what's going on here. So in the most recent polling, just to be accurate, you'll see that Trump is winning the state by about 5 to 8%. So that's about a 6.5% difference. I only put the caveat there because we're not sure about the Kennedy support at the end of the day, but it's definitely going Republican at this rate. Moving on to the state of Nevada, you will see that its 6 electoral votes look to be pretty solid for Donald Trump. In fact, when you look at it, Emerson College, as of 10 days ago, has Trump up by 3 with Kennedy at 7. And if you look at the 1v1, you'll notice that Emerson has them tied. This one, I don't believe for a couple of different reasons. Obviously, how the hell is it that big of a difference between if Kennedy's in the race and not? That just like mathematically does not make sense. And I think it'd take too long for me to explain it. But again, it just doesn't check out. Now, when it comes to the other polls, we can also refer to these as they're not that old. They're within the last month. You'll notice that Trump is up by 5, 5, 3, 3, 6. So that's the last month of polling. So just given that fact, I think that Trump plus 3 is the most accurate out of these. And I think he's closer to Trump plus 5. But and that's also we haven't seen the full effects of the polling after Trump promising to get rid of tips. The taxes on those tips, not the tips. Obviously, you keep more of it if you're in the service industry under Trump. And so that's a big promise, not because it's hard to achieve as president, but because it's actually a really good way to pander to people in a very good niche, like in a place like Nevada, especially Vegas. And God knows how many casino waitresses would love to see this policy implemented. And so that vote ought to be getting a little bit metastasized and better for Donald Trump. But moving on to Arizona, that's another one I wanted to speak about. I think this state's super solid Republican. In fact, if you look at this, imagine in 2020 seeing Arizona this Republican in the polling. We see that in the last dozen polls, basically, Trump is up in literally every single one of them. It's looking even better than Nevada, some would say. If we look at the most recent stuff, you'll notice that Emerson, just to have a common thread here, as of last week, has Trump up by 4. And in a 5-way race with Kennedy in it, obviously, you have Trump up by 3. And the most recent poll, which I don't believe, has Trump up by 10. That's ridiculous, obviously, because, again, Biden only gets 1/3 of the vote. That's not going to happen, but still notable because it's crazy. This other poll has Trump up by 6, which I believe more so by American Greatness, but it's smaller than the Emerson one, by the way, which is a 40% difference in correspondence rate. But let's see how far you would have to go to even see a Biden win. You have to go all the way to May 19th to find a crappy poll with only half the normal size of respondents to have Trump losing. But even more so, last month when I was 20 years old, you'll notice Citizens to Save Our Republic, which is a Democrat super PAC, has Trump winning by 2 against Biden head-to-head. And when Kennedy's in the race, he's winning by 4. So if the Democrats as of last month have Trump winning the state by 2 or 4, that's a really good sign because, again, Biden's on the downtrend ever so slightly, especially after the conviction and the fundraising gap has narrowed considerably. And so that's a safe Republican state if I've ever seen one. Now I got to the point where I have this planned. This segment is the Nebraska 2nd District. So as we know, the Nebraska 2nd District doesn't really have polling for a couple of different reasons, as it's only one electoral vote and it's within the confines of a very Republican state. So then you would have to logistically organize people to, because it's one thing if you sell your people to go work in Wisconsin or something, but they're, to ask people to work in Nebraska seems like very boring. And so maybe that's why we don't get the polling. but it might actually end up mattering. For example, let's say Biden retains these 3 states, then obviously whoever wins the Nebraska 2nd District can make it a tie election, which is huge. Okay, for the first time in the series, we will have some polling from the Nebraska 2nd District. We have some results from Dan Osborne, who's an independent party candidate, which I never heard of. But according to that polling 3 months ago or 2 months ago, you have Trump up by 3, and then 3 in this other one. The thing is that it doesn't say how many likely voters are in the sample, so that's a little disconcerting because I've never seen that be absent. And then when it comes to a Republican-sponsored poll by Iron Light with only 400 people polled, you'll notice that Trump is losing by 5, which again doesn't really make sense either. And so you cannot really trust these polls. So you're going to have to just rely on my own expertise. So like the video if you want me to get into that. Nebraska, for the people that are interested, is super difficult to tell because like I said, there's no polls really on the district itself. And if you look at a poll in general, it has Trump winning by like 23. And so you can't really deduce what's happening there. But to refer to 2020, Trump lost that district by about 6 percentage points, I believe. Which means that the district itself voted to the left of the country because Trump only lost the popular vote by less than 5. And so that means that even if Trump were to win other places, it's more likely that the district in and of itself votes Democrat, unfortunately. And so for that to be the case is very, very difficult to understand because, again, there's no polling on it. And, well, obviously the country will trend Republican by maybe 5%. Biden did win it by 6-ish. And so if that's the case, then it might be ever so slightly Democrat, in which case Biden would win if he retained these other 3 states, which obviously isn't happening. But let's see what these states say. So right now we do have Pennsylvania. As we can see here, there's a common thread of Trump being above Biden basically the entire time as of the last few months. That being said, we do have the most recent polls that we can show you. And today we do have Emerson College. And by today, I mean as of 4 days ago, it has Trump up by 2 in a 1v1, which seems legit. And then when Kennedy's in the race, he has a small pronounced effect towards helping Donald Trump by 1%. And so that's the most recent poll there. And again, this is in line with the other ones. Trump lost 2, then Biden up narrowly, but these are crappier polls for the most part. Anyway, so I think that, a Trump plus 2 margin in the most recent poll is completely legit. And so we're going to put that there. So Trump right there wins the election, even though it looked a little frisky when it came to Nebraska. But anyway, let's move on. Now, Michigan's another one where my niche expertise on this is really necessary because, again, Biden's up technically in the aggregate, but we have to look at the most recent polling too, which is the gimmick of the video, guys. And so you look at it, and Emerson, for example, has, as of 4 days ago, Trump up by 1 in a head-to-head and up by 2 with Kennedy on the ballot, which also makes sense. This is obviously in disagreement with some of these polls. As you can see further down last month, Biden was ahead for whatever reason. In low key, this might be true. Again, I was in Michigan last week, and because I was born in Michigan, and what you'll notice is that there's plenty of people that went from Trump to Gretchen Whitmer and voted against Tudor Dixon, for example. And so for there to be somewhat of a reversion from the Trump people to back to Biden might be ever so slightly true. Again, it's hard to say that because obviously Biden has done a terrible job. But I think that the Republican Party will get its act together, and I think Trump winning by 1 or 2 is completely in line with reality. He should do a little bit better than in 2016 even, because again, there's really nothing to vote for Biden for, in my opinion, but maybe I'm biased, and I am. But let's look at Wisconsin. So just paying attention to Wisconsin, this one's a little bit more rocky as well. So Biden's up in the aggregate, like I just showed you, by 0.3, but we do have some differing data points. Of course, the Emerson College wave of polls from last week shows Trump up by 3 head-to-head. And then they also have Biden up by, I guess Biden would be up by -2 in this case. So again, Kennedy in the race, 6 percentage points seems reasonable to me. Kennedy seems to be a guy who's going to get anywhere from, let's say, 4 to 8 percentage points if I had to guess. But anyway, so Trump up by 2 in a 5-man race, or I guess 4 men and 1 woman. But the point being is that if we consult the other polls, we do have some very shoddy ones that ruin the aggregate. Like, for example, this one, where somehow Donald Trump is projected to only get 31% of the popular vote and loses by 7 to Biden. That's completely asinine, by the way. So this sample. So again, when liberal YouTubers point out like, oh my God, a poll has Biden winning by 7. It's like, yeah, it has a sample size of 338. But when you look at a sample size that's bigger, it usually shows Trump winning, obviously, or at least it's close. And even these other ones, like Trump up by 1%, there's only 290 people shown in this poll. And so, that's horrible. That's horrible. Again, that's not a good enough sample basis. Now, when we're looking at another group, like the Democrats, as of last month, they even had Trump tying with Biden, even though those polls tend to be pretty slanted, obviously. And so if that's the case, it seems like Trump will likely win the state by a few percentage points. And so that leaves you with the update. This is the 2024 presidential election prediction according to the most recent polls, within reason. Obviously, I had to use my discernment to say, like, okay, like if you have Trump winning Arizona by 10, we're not going to count that because, again, it's not realistic. But again, I think all the results here are completely within the realm of possibility. And again, there are some sleeper flips like New Hampshire, the Nebraska 2nd District, Minnesota, Virginia, whatever have you. And for Biden, again, he might retain, let's say, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and the 2nd District in Nebraska. So we got to look into that. There's also Maine that we kind of left out the video. So comment down below if you want to see Maine coverage. Again, with Nebraska, it's very hard to get the district polling, which is what matters. But anyway, I'll see y'all on the next one. Adios.